Welcome to this edition of Morgan You Asked For podcast. Wednesday night, the 22nd of May. Solo tonight. Trevor was back this weekend. Saw him on Monday night. He's traveling back and not made it back quite yet. So tonight didn't work out. So you have me solo tonight. A little bit different topic here tonight. It's not flashy or anything big, but it is a huge paradigm shift in college athletics that is starting to take place. The dominoes are starting to fall. Conferences are voting. The Board of Governors is voting to settle a lawsuit. It's called the House versus NCAA. I don't know why it's called that, but essentially what this is doing is setting up a $2.7 billion fund to pay players, both players in the past and then future players coming up. As we all know, the NCAA for years and years has benefited to the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars of money and not paying the labor, which is why you see college coaches, college facilities making just as much, if not more, than the pros, and then the facilities are nicer for colleges than they are in the pros because they don't have to pay their athletes. You know, Bill Belichick might have been making $15 million a year or $20 million a year, but Tom Brady was making 30. You know, Dak Prescott is making $25 or $30 million. They're making a lot more money than all the coaches, the GMs, the athletic, and the athletic directors on the college side. They've been able to fund all these facilities and pay all the coaches and increase their staffs because they haven't had to pay the players. Well, that is changing and changing quickly. I've got a few stats here that I'm going to kind of read that I've wrote down here. The Big 12 and the ACC voted to settle on Tuesday. Today, the NCAA Board of Governors and the Big 10 voted for the settlement to agree to the settlement. And then with the Pac-12, which actually still has to vote this because these schools are not made the transfer to the Big 12 or Big 10 or ACC until July 1. So the Pac-12 actually still exists as a conference. The last thing they're going to do as a conference vote is essentially going to vote to pay your players. And once, the SEC and the Pac-12 do it, then it's going to come down to more lawyer stuff. There's going to be settlements. There's going to be back and forth, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second. But they're settling this because the agreement is like $2.7 billion, but if it would go to trial, it'd be like $4.2 billion. So they're saving about half. And now just a few more things on this. I just have this written down here. $2.7 billion. I've said that a couple times already. To former athletes, and it will allow schools and round numbers to pay players $20 million from each school. Almost like a salary cap-ish on the university. That is not per player. That is not per team. That is, for example, Iowa State paid $20 million how they want, kind of how they want. And that's going to be another thing argued in court on who gets what. And Iowa will have that. LSU will have $20 million. Texas A&M, Florida, Georgia, all of the schools. Drake could have $20 million to pay players. Now, that's a whole different argument. Drake, UNI, those schools that are Division I, this is all Division I NCAA schools, which Drake is, UNI is, it'd be like North Dakota State would be. Now, Division IIs, like Northwest Missouri State or Truman State or Upper Iowa, those schools are not in on this. This is Division I athletics. So essentially, you got to think if they play Division I, the bowl subdivision football, or the FCF's, the championship division, and then all the NCAA tournament schools for basketball. And that's where this money is coming from. Essentially, the NCAA's biggest money maker is the NCAA tournament. So they're going to take a 10-year reduction. I think I have it on here, $1.6 billion over 10 years in reduction of the NCAA tournament revenues. 40% of that is going to be the big, soon to be four. It's really the big five conferences, soon to be the big four as of July 1. But those schools are going to take up 40%. Now, there's only 60 schools roughly in that, maybe a little more, that's eating 40%. But 60% of this is from all the other schools. Now, there's like 300 schools, so that's like 250 schools that have to come up with 60%. However, those are the schools that don't make the money. This is all about football. Unfortunately, basketball doesn't matter. Your wrestling team, your women's basketball team, they don't produce the same revenue that football does. Football is about 85% of revenue to each school. Then the 15% is everything else, plus your royalties, plus everything. But 85% is football. So you have to make money in football. Well, Drake doesn't even have Division I, doesn't have scholarship football. UNI, does not make money in football. The way they make their money in football is going to play Iowa State or Iowa or Wisconsin or whoever, the Division I, and they get paid $1 million. That funds their program. And then they get NCAA tournament money from their conference. So that is one thing that, most people know, but when a Missouri Valley team gets into the NCAA tournament and they win 1 or 2 or 3 games, the NCAA gives the Missouri Valley Conference a check, and then the Missouri Valley Conference distributes that check to each school. Now, if you are the team that are playing those, I think you get a little bit bigger cut. But even like this year where UNI did not get into the NCAA tournament, and Drake did get in the NCAA tournament, Drake's going to get a little bit bigger check, but UNI still gets a check from the NCAA tournament because just how everything works. Iowa State gets a check from the Big 12 gets a check when all their each game that's played gets a certain amount of money, and then it gets just distributed back to the conference and then distributed back to each school. So that's how all these TV rights, and when Iowa State's on Fox on a Sunday afternoon for basketball or whatever, that is what this is all about, is your TV money and your TV rights. And what's going to happen is these athletes are going to be essentially the same thing. I'm kind of getting my head of myself there. I'm going to come back to that. So beginning of 2025, there's going to be roughly $20 million a school. Now, there's not going to be a lot of schools that are going to do that. The Power 4 conferences will, I would suspect. Iowa State would be, I think, will be hard-pressed to do that, to get all the way to 20 million. Now, there's certain schools that won't have a problem with it. But I think Iowa State's I think they need to get there if they want to compete. But they're going to have to make some decisions. And there's always unintended consequences to all these decisions and settlements that are happening. Do the athletes deserve to get paid? Absolutely. I have changed my mind. I have flipped on that subject. 5 years ago, I absolutely not. They get a lot of advantages that your normal college student does not get, but they also do a lot more. And the amount of money that the schools are making and the conferences are making and coaches are making, athletic director, just everybody's making a lot of money. And it is time for the players to get it. And I 100% agree. The NIL was a great step. Unfortunately, it went right past NIL into pay for play. All these collectives are paying these guys. Yes, are they agreeing to go to these charities and doing things and getting paid? Yes, but it's not overall, it's pay for play. And they should be. You know, when you are playing the NCAA championship football game, when, you know, how many 25 million people watch it or whatever it is, you should get a cut of that. And they are. So I agree with what's happening. But here's what's going to this is going to take several months to sort out the actual details, because they're going to come back and there's going to be mediation back and forth. Some things that need to get solved. Title IX. Title IX is about equal opportunity for males and females, not equal result. That's where some people do not get confused. It is about opportunity. And unfortunately, just the way it is, that football makes all the money. I believe there's going to be those players are going to get paid more than everybody else. And they probably deservedly so, because they're the ones bringing in the revenue. And then they're going to try to curtail the NIL market. Right now, it's just the wild, wild west. I think there's going to be some guardrails. The NILs will not go away. These athletes will become employees of the university or some very close variation of it. But NIL is not going away, and I'll talk about why in just a few minutes here. So let's go right now. Let's just say an athletic department has a $100 million budget for easy numbers. And they're operating the way it works now. They're a nonprofit. When I donate money to Iowa State, I get a tax write-up because they're, you know, a tax-free, you know, essentially a charity. So they have to spend all $100 million. Well, starting next, you know, fall of 25, of that $100 million budget, 20 million of it, so 1/5, 20%, is going to be allocated to the athletes. So now to do all your other stuff, you only have $80 million, because your budget's probably not going up $20 million. Now, Big Ten, SEC, when the new TV contracts come in, it might go up that much. So I don't think those schools will have a problem. But ACC, Big 12, and everybody else is going to have a problem. They're going to have to make some hard decisions. So just some ideas. Where will these cuts come from? I think some of the non-revenue sports are in serious, serious trouble. Golf, tennis, rowing, swimming and diving. I think wrestling is going to get hurt hard. I don't think in Iowa here it will. I don't think Iowa State, with their rich traditions and being top 5 in the country every year, or most every year. Iowa State's been down a little bit, but they're kind of getting back into that. I don't think wrestling here in Iowa's in trouble, but I think around the country, wrestling might be in a lot of trouble. It's an expensive sport, takes quite a few wrestlers, and just realistically, it's a male sport. Now, the thing that could offset it is you add the women's wrestling to equal it out. So some schools are going to decide to do that, but if they would do that to get the Title IX kind of a little bit more equal, some other sports are going to get cut. One thing that I've thought is coaching salaries. You know, obviously these coaches have signed their contracts now, but maybe in the future they don't get a raise. They're like, you know, the administration kind of finally says, hey, we are starting to play the players now. Your salaries staying the same. We can sign you for, you know, 5, 6, 7 years, but your salary's staying the same. And then future contracts aren't as big as they've been. And I think that's a good place to recruit some of that money. Do these coaches need to make 10, 12, 13 million dollars a year as some of the top ones are now? Probably not. They would do just fine getting back to 10, you know, assistant coaches, you know, some of them are making $2 million, maybe get them all to $1 million. So the coordinator's at $1 million, head coaches at 10, and then everybody else, you know, 750 to 500. all making a really good living, but just curtail that a little bit. And then I think another thing is just reduction of staff. You know, I I look to when I was at Iowa State, you had your 9 coaches. Now there are 10 besides head coach. Then you got your strength coach, but now you've got all the analysts and GAs and you know directors of this. Staff is 3 times as big as when I was there. So that's a place where they could cut as well. Instead of 30 guys or ladies working there, now there's only 20. So that's I don't think there's going to be rules on that, but I think that's where universities could go to that. I don't think they're going to put caps or anything, and they could. Then the other thing is just true roster size. Most college football teams have about 130, 140 guys on them. With the transfer portal, I don't think you need that many anymore because people are coming and going every year as it is. When you sign a kid as a freshman out of high school, as a freshman coming from high school, if you really think he's going to be there for 5 years, redshirt a year, and then play for 4, I would like to see those numbers of kids that actually do that at one school. It's not very many anymore. One, they're good enough to leave early for the NFL, so they don't finish, which is great. They're great players. They deserve it. Go to the pros, make your money. 2, they're not playing for 2, 3 years and they transfer, and then they can go play somewhere. And some of them are really good right away and get a better offer and go somewhere else. So I don't know if you need 140 guys on a team anymore. So that's a place where you could save some money as well. Instead of, that number being 140, now it's 100. And maybe you go from 85 scholarships to 70. Or you only have 15 walk-ons. So the walk-on program hurts a lot. Those are decisions that the NCAA is going to have to make if they want to make rules on that, or just universities in general are going to have to make. And those are just, and then obviously projects. Iowa State's an example. They had a wrestling project that was going to do, they're not doing that now. I think building these Taj Mahal facilities are a thing of the past. My first game as a coach, I was at Arrowhead Stadium, Iowa State versus Florida State. And Iowa State's facilities were not great by any means. And I'm sure they've improved at Arrowhead and everything, but Kansas City Chiefs, we used the Kansas City Chiefs locker room. It was no better than ours at Iowa State. They don't have all the bells and whistles. Now, that was 22 years ago now, but just everything's gotten so much nicer. I'm sure Arrowhead's is nicer now, but Iowa State's is so much better than it was. But if you ask the players, what do they want? Do they want more? 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they want the best facilities. Because that's the thing that they could control. Now, if you ask them if they want the best facilities or if they want an extra $50,000 in their pocket, they want an extra $50,000 in their pocket. Cannot blame them. So you're not going to build the Taj Mahal. You got to have nice stuff, but it's not going to be extravagant, I don't believe. Kind of one of the new things, the WNBA, which Caitlin Clark is playing right now. She hadn't scored when I looked. I'm just a little bit after the game started here. While the WNBA was not flying private, was just a revenue thing. But yet all these ladies were used to flying private if they played at big time schools. Like Caitlin Clark flew a private plane, charter, whatever you want to call it, at Iowa every game. She never flew commercial. The girls at Iowa State don't. The girls at UConn don't. The girls at South Carolina, they all fly in a private plane that is funded by the university, which is overall funded by the football program and the TV rights from the football. Now, here's the funny thing, and I think I talked about this, but the Power 4 schools are paying 40%, and then the small schools are paying 60%. Now, there's a lot more of them, and this is like the taxation in the tax code here in America. It's kind of weird. Now, obviously, if you make $100 million a year, your percentage that you pay in taxes is less than I pay. And I make what I make as a teacher. Now, they obviously pay way more true money in it, in quotations. Their tax bill might be $50 million or whatever it is. And my tax bill is what mine is. But the percentage is higher. And I think your UNIs, your Drakes, schools like that are going to get hurt bad in this. And their athletic departments are going to take big hits in staffing, in just everything. And those are the schools that I worry about because they don't have the football program to fund them. But yet they provide great opportunity for kids. And I think that's going to be some of the unintended consequences in schools like that having a hard time. Because one, they're not going to pay people. They're not going to have they're not going to pay $20 million. Just not going to do it. And I don't know. So they're just going to get a lesser player. And it's just not going to be the same. And that's sad to me. Because I'm not a Drake fan. I'm not a UNI fan. But when they're good, they are fun to watch. And I enjoy watching them. Now, here's kind of flipping the page here on my notes. Here's some ideas that I've heard. I've read them. I've heard them on the radio, things like that. So these are not all my ideas. Some of them kind of variations of, but these are things that I've heard that are going to happen. And Brent Bloom and Brad Heinrichs, the Swarm Collective and the We Will Collective, respectively, there have talked about these on local radio shows and kind of some of their ideas and how they think things are going to happen. That $20 million is going to get split up, and each school is going to do it a little bit different. But what essentially is going to happen is these players are going to sign agreements. And this is a thing that I think is going to be interesting is what are these agreements contracts, I'm just going to say contracts, going to be? Is it going to be to play every game? So you're not sitting out a bowl game. So there's not a load management thing. Is it for beginning of the season to the end of the year? Is it a multi-year contract? Signed for 3 years. So say you're a freshman, you sign a 3-year deal for your rights to go to the university to get money. Can you not go to the pros if something happens where now you can? Like you've proven yourself good enough. Can you not go? Like basketball, you can go after 1 year. Now football, you can't go for a few years. But if you sign a 3-year deal with the university as a freshman, can you not go to the NBA if your draft stock rises? Interesting question. I don't know. But here's what's going to happen. They're going to sign a deal with the university, signing over their NIL rights. So then the university will go find it, sell it, and you're going to have a commercial for Jimmy's Auto down the street, or however you want to say it. State, and Caitlin Clark, State Farm and Nike sign over your rights, just like the university signs over their rights to the conference. Iowa State doesn't go sell their rights. The Big 12 conference sells their rights. Iowa doesn't sell their rights individually. The Big 10 conference sells it as a whole because they can get more money as a whole than individually. Now, there are a few schools that would be better off. Notre Dame is a great example. They do theirs. That's why they're independent. They go do theirs individually. They're on NBC. They get to keep all that money. Now, here's an interesting thing. Use Caitlin Clark as an example. She would be smart not to sign this deal with the university and go do it herself. Go sell it herself. Go hire herself an agent. And that's what she did. From everything I heard, she did not take any money from the Swarm. It was all her own deals. Her family, whoever she had represent her, went and got her Nike deal, her Gatorade deal, her State Farm deal. So the elite superstars, and I think in this case at Iowa State, it would be Audie Crooks. I think she would be wise not to sign over her rights to the university and do it on her own. Local girl, big personality. I think she could do well for herself on her own. But, if you're the backup tackle on the Iowa State football team, yeah, sign your rights over. They get you 3 deals and they get you $50,000. That's a great deal. If you're Rocco Beck, starting quarterback, Power 5 conference, you got a question to make. If you're Archie Manning, you don't sign that deal. You go do your own thing. But if you're the third string quarterback, you sign it in a heartbeat and then you go. So it's going to be interesting. And then that's where that $20 million goes. The schools allocate it as, your starting quarterbacks gets $1 million. Does your starting 5 on the basketball court, is that $5 million? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. But the tides are changing, and college sports and college athletics are going to be different going forward as we know it in the next few weeks. Good and bad. Then last thing I want to say here, it looks like I'm watching the game right now. The Dallas Mavericks just beat Minnesota, and they're going to go to the TNT postgame show. It looks like TNT is not going to get the NBA package. So I believe that show, as constructed, will be no more in the summer a year from now. And that is a sad as well. And that's what happens when money and greed take over. Things change for the good and bad. Now, that program might just move to another network. And then it's kind of the same. It's not the same because it won't be on TNT. We all know it like that. Might be on NBC. It might be on ESPN. I don't know. Or they might just say it's time to move on. But that is another tough thing about today's environment in sports and money. Big business. And some, networks that have paid for it for a long time. There's new people in play. Amazon, Netflix, Apple. If those companies want to get involved, everything changes because they got more money than all these others. So that's about a half hour. That's a good night here. Again, thanks everybody for listening. Rate, review, subscribe at your favorite podcast player. If you don't have one, I ask you to listen to it on Spotify. Subscribe on Spotify. That helps us out the most in our affiliation with Spotify. But thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.